That's right, my friends. People always say, Simon, you should every now and then do a negative video, so I've listened to you, but also just to, make sure you hate me more. Simon Miller, Proteus champion from Progress Wrestling. Some individuals are getting so mad about this. Listen, I'll level with you. The magic never died for me, so I may as well have won the lottery. But that's right, today, and these change every single day as always, but I have ticked 10 wrestling matches that I absolutely can't stand, and now we can get mad about them together. So I put them in the order of 10, but I'll be honest with you, what I put as number 1 is basically there just so we can have some fun at the end. And at number 10, we go back to WCW. And that's right, there's a lot of WCW in this list for obvious reasons. And it's Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior from Halloween Havoc 1998. Now, if you've never seen this and you just know about the wrestling lore, I suppose, of Hogan and Warrior and what they did at WrestleMania, you're probably looking off into the distance going, well, that sounds very, very interesting. What the hell that happened there? Well, actually, when you learn more about the real people behind the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, I suppose, it kind of does make sense because they're not the most nice people, is something I would just throw out there.
Horace Hogan has come out with a chair in his hand.
Yeah, so essentially, Ultimate Warrior got brought into WCW. He was actually going to go back to, there's a contract out there you can see. The Ultimate Warrior was going to be a part of the Attitude Era, which would have been the most ridiculous thing ever. But him and Vince McMahon could never get on, so WCW decided, we'll bring you in, because Hulk Hogan wanted to bring him in, because he was still mad that he lost to Hulk Hogan, lost to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania, and he wanted to get his win back. Now, let's not pretend this is just what happens at WCW. Remember with Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez, let's not talk about it and stuff. But honestly, man, I didn't know about any of this political BS when I was watching, because I was essentially a fetus. So I was like, oh my gosh, we get to see Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior Part 2. It's not just the match itself. It's the preamble, it's the build, it's the debut promo, the Warrior cuts. It just goes on and on and on. Doesn't make any sense. He may as well literally go, the cucumber talked to the radiator, and the radiator looked at me in the eye and said, Ultimate Warrior, you are gonna rise into the stars, and the moon is then gonna come out your tuchus. Like, what has that got to do with it? Forget English. What are you going on about? And then there's the time when Hulk Hogan saw the Ultimate Warrior in the mirror, but then he disappeared, and Eric Bischoff walked in going, I don't know what you're talking about, but we, the viewer, could see the Ultimate Warrior as well, so Hulk Hogan wasn't crazy, because we all saw the Ultimate Warrior. It's so bad. And you get to the match, and it's diabolical. Like, it just is. Listen, star power is so important in wrestling, but sometimes you just have to hold your hands up and say, bad is bad, and this is bad. And of course, it doesn't end, but towards the culmination of it, you get it's genuinely funny. You get the bit with the fire paper, when Hogan goes to set fire to Ultimate Warrior's face, put a 1 on the crime counter, and it doesn't work, and it just kind of singes Hogan's moustache. It's so awful. It's so dreadful. I can't even remember who wins. Of course I can. It's Hulk Hogan. He had to get his win back. But it is truly, truly dreadful. And if you have, I don't know, it can't be more than 12 minutes. If you have 12 minutes today, don't watch it. And in fact, it's Halloween Havoc 98 when you get Goldberg versus DDP, or is that 99? It must be 1998. That's a fantastic match. WWE screwed up and they cut it off the television. I think it's this show. I may be getting it wrong. But watch that match instead, if you're going to watch a Halloween Havoc match, or go back a couple of years, or a year, I suppose, and watch Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio. Night and day, but again, as a kid that thought this was going to be amazing, it really, really wasn't. Which all ties into number 9, which is The Undertaker versus Bill Goldberg from the Saudi Arabia Crown Jewel show. Now listen, nothing else needs to really be said about this. Both The Undertaker and Bill have come out and said, yep, wasn't great, wasn't very happy with it. Once more, you'd have to be blind not to realize it didn't go to plan. But there was more to this that kind of wound me up. And this is no disrespect to either of them, who are legends in their field, whether you like it or not. I'm talking about professional wrestling here. And even in the build-up to that, and again, ups and downs was alive and well, so you could hear me talk about this on What Culture at the time. This wasn't a dream match. Like, it was an interesting match, and it certainly was a legend versus a legend, but nobody, when the Monday Night Wars was on, was going, I tell you what I want to see. Goldberg versus The Undertaker. And if you had have said that, somebody would have gone, you need to leave. You're at a wrestling party. You need to go right now, right? You don't know what you're talking about, because everyone would have gone Goldberg, Steve Austin, Undertaker, Sting. Every single time. They were the dream matches. Now, maybe it was a dream in the sense you fell asleep one day and you had this dream. Like, that's interesting, but it couldn't happen at the time. But it was poppycock, and it was baloney. It was like the first Clash at the Castle when WWE just went, listen, Drew McIntyre is from Wales, okay? We all agreed. Then they did Clash at the Castle 2. Oh, he's actually from Scotland. Ignored what we said. So that had already irked me, and then it just doesn't work, and it falls apart, and it's scary, and it's dangerous. And that's the real reason that I don't like it. I actually feel they don't need my sympathy, but I do feel quite sorry for them because, again, I sound like an a-hole. Please forgive me. I've been in those kind of matches where it all goes wrong, and there's nothing you can do. There just isn't. You're like, oh, man, life just wants to kick my backside today. But when you're actually scared about the competitors in the ring and you just want it to end, you can't like the match. I just don't think we needed to do it to begin with. And I truly do not think that if the Saudi Arabia shows had ever come about, we would have done it anyway, because there were other more interesting people to pick Goldberg and The Undertaker against a few years ago, even more so as they only had a few matches left in the can. If you were told a cool story, of course, like always, you can tell a good narrative and then put any two people together. But it came out of nowhere. It was done to be this legend surprise match. Now I like it. No, I'll never watch it again. I don't want to. I will tell you an interesting story because obviously I try and be a positive guy. When I first submitted the ups and downs for that Crown Jewel show, originally I tried to be, again, it wasn't that bad. And then even after I sent it, got in touch with What Culture and I said, no, take it back. I've re-recorded it, use this one instead, because sometimes you have to see what's in front of your face. And as we are talking about then, go subscribe to What Culture Wrestling and please subscribe to me as well. And just muck around with the video, like it, share it, subscribe it. It make me feel like a happy boy. I should not have said that. And we're back to WCW. 1 year on, 1999, Uncensored. It's exactly the same as number 10. It was Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan, right? And I was like, this is going to be incredible. We're doing Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan. Of course, we'd done it a lot in 1996 when Hogan had first gotten into WCW. And when Ric Flair jumped over in 1992, they did sort of do it. Never on a big event, but WWF did touch it. But I don't know, I guess it was my age and knowing all that I did know and learning more about the history. Wouldn't say I was super pumped for it, but I was certainly excited. I went out of my way to see it. And I got it written down here because I get it wrong. It was a barbed wire steel cage first blood match. Now, we all know the rules of the first blood match. You have to bleed, right? The first person to bleed loses. We saw it at, for me, not the most famous one, in not even modern times. What most people talk about, if you are a kind of my generation wrestling fan, is King of the Ring 1998, Stone Cold versus Kane, because it was a little bit squiffy because Kane had a mask on. How's he going to bleed? This is absolutely stupid. And of course, he did the whole, this Sunday after, I will make you bleed, or whatever the hell he said. He dumped the red paint on his head. Man, wrestling is so ridiculous sometimes, but I love it. And do you know how this match ends? I mean, Ric Flair won, which is quite a big deal, but it ends in a pinfall. Furthermore, it only goes 14 minutes, and both these guys are bleeding so much, and nobody cares. So why did we throw the first blood in there? Well, I'll tell you why, because it was WCW 1999, and they were just lied to you. That's what they do. There was no disqualification matches that would end in DQ. There would be matches when you would get Wrestler X versus Wrestler Y, and Wrestler C would win. And it wouldn't be like a Money in the Bank cash-in. Somebody would just walk in and make the pin. You'd be looking around like, wait, why are you allowing that, referee? You have that, remember that catch-as-catch-can match between Dean Malenko and Billy Kidman, I think it was. And the whole rule was you have to do it in the ring. But Malenko only got clued up like about 3 milliseconds before he went out there. So he just went into wrestler mode and instantly he left the ring. Charles Robinson was like, well, you're out. You've lost. Oh, my gosh. The era of WCW is so funny, and you should absolutely watch it. But, yeah, when we do these kind of conversations, there's always one that comes into my mind because I was so disappointed. I spent money on this. What was it, a $50 pay-per-view? Probably. So I didn't have any money then. I was like 13 or whatever it was. I was younger than that. How was I going to find $50? And yet I did, and this is what they gave me. It genuinely makes me upset. It genuinely makes me sad. So when we do go all negative Nancy, I'm always going to give it a kicking. Which brings us to number 7. And again, I've got it written down here because there's just way too much information. But it is the Viagra on a pole match between Billy Kidman and Shane Douglas. It was on Nitro. That's what I got up here. I think it was the 31st of January, 2000.
If he gets the Viagra, maybe. And Billy Kidman's got the bottle of Viagra. Here we go.
Now, the reason I want to bring this up is it was a Viagra on a pole match. And it all tied into like Tori Wilson and who was going to have sex with who. And listen, you can say whatever you want about Vince Russo. If you like what he did during the Attitude Era, great. If you like what he did in TNA, great. If you like what he did when he jumped over to WCW, genuinely great. He put Judy Bagwell on a pole. And sometimes, or a forklift, I should say. Sometimes I wake up laughing about that. He brought joy into my life. But this is the wrong side of all of that. Because if I saw this match, but years later. Thankfully, I wasn't watching this Nitro. I think I'd given up by then. But years later, if I was watching a Viagra on a pole match, which I probably did when I started making YouTube content, is the first time that I saw it. But if I'd been watching this in my entertainment time and somebody had walked in, how do you explain that to them? Why is there Viagra on a pole? Oh, because it's really sort of basically sexist right now. And we're kind of just, trying to appealed to the lowest common denominator. And listen, Shane Douglas, really good wrestler. Billy Kidman, really good wrestler. They could have just had a match, and Tori Wilson, being the manager, could have sort of, tied in like a Miss Elizabeth type character, I suppose. So there could be some sort of relationship jeopardy if that's what you want to do. But if you've never seen this, just go and watch it, and you will just be embarrassed. You'll be embarrassed that you like wrestling. You'll be embarrassed that wrestling even exists. And it ties into this idea that Vince Russo always thought there had to be a gimmick, there always had to be a stipulation, and you can't just do a one-on-one wrestling match, because that's not what wrestling fans want to see. This is his words, not mine. It's why it's always rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm like, even if I'm the only person, I am proof that your rule is massively incorrect. Because again, if you give me a good build, I'm able to buy into any character ever. It's why recently he said, I don't want to get too off track here, but we may as well. That's what this channel is all about. He was talking about Jey Uso's title win and how happy he was, and he was crying, and he was like, man, how pathetic. And he defined it as a prop. He then tried to justify these claims by saying, I'm looking at it from a producer's, a writer's point of view. And I thought that was poppycock as well. I think everybody involved in the story is going to highlight it and make it more of a moment if they do understand. And let's compare it to sports. Let's go to soccer, football over here in the UK. When people win the Premier League, they cry. When they win the FA Cup, they cry. When they win the Champions League, they cry. So even if wrestling is simulated sports, of course they would cry, because even if you're doing it to tie into the moment and to tie into the acting, quote unquote, then crying actually makes it more realistic. So why would he criticize that? It doesn't make any sense. We'll talk about my Proteus title, my Progress belt, which now makes me an absolute a-hole. Again, we've said that twice now, so it must be true. I was super emotional about it, and it wasn't the fact that I had won a championship. It was the reaction to it. It was the overwhelming comments I got. It was all the work that I put in. It was kind of proving a point to myself, because somebody once told me that I was never going to get booked by Progress. I was like, oh wow, because I dedicated myself to this, and I believe to a certain extent I was able to pull this off, and no one deserves anything. I'm not saying that, but to me and my personal journey, which is a terrible word in 2024, it had emotional connection, right? And it's the same with this. So to say that Jey Uso crying was bad for wrestling, but sticking some Viagra on a pole is actually meant to improve it, well, you can see why I don't like matches like this. It basically is to do with the sauce. Number 6, we go back to WCW in 2000. It's Hulk Hogan again. It's Bash at the Beach, and he's taking on Jeff Jarrett. Because it's not a match. It is political backstage nonsense happening in the ring. We also probably could have put, is it Goldberg, Kevin Nash, and Scott Steiner in here? When Bill Goldberg left. This is the stuff you should watch, man. It will crack you up. But Goldberg walks out. The commentators are like, oh, man, he walked out because he didn't want to take the power bomb. And that was part of the script. We think he was meant to win. So who's going to win now? They just told you wrestling's fake. What are you watching for? You stupid buffoon. You absolute loser. But, I mean, I don't even know how to explain this. Like, Jarrett lays down and Hogan pins him, and then he is the champion, he's not the champion, and Vince Russo came out and cut a promo, which apparently wasn't going to happen, so Hulk Hogan sued him, and then he fell out with WCW, then Booker T won the championship later on, which was a good thing. Booker T should have won that belt, but it was so overshadowed by this. You can read literal pages on this. People have done 3-part podcasts on this, trying to explain the situation, and even at the end, I'm like, I don't get it. Can someone please explain this to me? And I don't think the people involved get it either. It's just taking away the wrestling from the wrestling. So again, a lot of these matches I talked about should probably 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm keeping the more relevant stuff, I suppose, for them, because we can have a bit more fun with it. But it just was, I was a WCW fan. I was always a WWE guy. But when WCW got hot, you couldn't help but jump over channels because you wanted to see what was happening. As a big Goldberg guy, a big Sting guy. But by the time they got to 2000, it just felt like they were insulting their audience. And I have an overwhelming memory of sort of feeling that way back then at the time. And then when you learn about all the other craziness that was going into it, like, man, you weren't for the fans at all. And that's why I put it in my, matches I hate list, because it didn't make me hate wrestling, but it made me feel like I was dumb for watching it. And I don't think you should ever do that. You should always respect your fans, and you should always invite them in. It doesn't mean everything is going to be good, but as long as you go in there with the right intentions. And when it came to this, well, it was only about one man, and I'm sure you can figure it out. Right, let's get into the good stuff. Backlash 2021, The Miz versus Damian Priest in a zombie lumberjack match. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this has to be in my top 10, but I tried to think of more modern matches that really made me go, oh no. This was one of them. It's for Batista's Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, whatever the hell that movie he was in, which actually the movie was fine. I mean, it wasn't great. It's like a very easy movie to watch. But there was just so much stuff afterwards that left me clueless, including, given what wrestling is and given how WWE operates, does this now mean the undead are part of the law of WWE? So I could see a zombie at any time, or were we just doing wink, wink, nudge, nudge? This is all a bunch of predetermined nonsense. Thanks for coming. Because The Miz gets attacked here, but he doesn't become a zombie, and that would happen in a zombie film. So it just has so many questions. Now, actually, I thought The Miz and Damian Priest did as well with this as they could. They didn't ask for this. It was a sponsorship match. Somebody paid the WWE a lot of money, and given that this was going down during the pandemic, even if it was sort of the back end of it, they probably thought, well, it's a good way to increase our revenue, and because the shows were getting a little bit laborious in the Thunderdome, which I'll be the first one to admit, we need to do different things. It's why we got all these cinematic matches too. But it's still really bad. Really bad's probably a bit of a stretch. But the fact that we just moved on from it so fast and we didn't try and sort of incorporate it, it's why I prefer what WWE does now. We have more sponsorship in matches than ever, but it's kind of just like, it looks like the ring has been thrown up on, or you have the LED boards and it's just like, sponsor, 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 okay. The horrific Prime logo in the middle of the squared circle. Whereas, actually, I kind of go two ways with it. On the one hand, I'm like, I appreciate the fact you tried to make this more wrestling. And on the other hand, I'm like, no, don't do this. Just stick it on boards. And I love goofy wrestling for life. This one to me was just, I don't know. I just remember watching it and being like, I think we need fans back now, please. Maybe it's just bad place, bad timing, right? Wrong place, wrong time. The pandemic had been going on. I, for one, was totally done with the Thunderdome. I certainly don't like going back and watch the funeral wrestling that is in the Performance Center. And I guess when I think back to that horrific period, which is only 4 years ago somehow, this is the match that always stands out in my head. But again, look what Damian Priest went on to do. The Miz is an all-timer no matter what he does now. He's already cemented his legacy. So it goes to show, it doesn't matter what kind of nonsense you are put in, there's always a way to come out the other side. Number 4 is one that I think we're all going to agree with, and we go back to 2019. It is that Hell in a Cell match between Seth Rollins and Bray Wyatt, the Fiend. Now, I was actually watching this in Scotland at the time. I was in a hotel. I just debuted for Discovery Wrestling, I believe. That was a really fun show too, because they were like, he's English, boo him. And I'd just started wrestling then, so it was cool to be a heel, even if I wasn't prepared for it at all. But we all know the deal with this. I mean, we essentially destroyed the Hell in a Cell stipulation until a few weeks ago, as I am recording this, when CM Punk and Drew McIntyre brought it back. Also, Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins. I forget about that. That match is absolutely supreme, a proper all-timer. But it just goes to show that we didn't know what we were doing with The Fiend. Like, this ended because Seth Rollins put a toolbox on his face and smashed it, and the referee stopped the match. It's Hell in a Cell, man. You put these two guys in there because they have a war that can't be sorted, so by hook or by crook, one person's walking out and the other person's not. And I guess that sort of happened, but it didn't, and the fans booed this in the arena. They knew. It's also had that horrible red light on everything, which I didn't actually mind. I thought you could make it work, but not for the whole entire match. And what really kind of drags it down, in my estimation, is a lot of writers have talked about this. I think even Vic Joseph talked about this, so it goes to show that it has to have some truth to it. Vince McMahon thought the reaction was hilarious, like, ha ha ha, screw him, who cares? And I think it's kind of, maybe this match sums up what WWE was in 2019, when we weren't working with the fans, we weren't trying to book for the fans, we were just trying to piss them off. We were trying to do whatever we could, again, just to get any kind of reaction, and that's not what wrestling should be. So I haven't watched this in a few years, but I have watched it a few times for other videos we've done. And it's just drab, and it's just uncreative, and it's very around the same time we were doing the dog food stuff. WWE just didn't have a direction, and poor Seth Rollins, it murdered that character. He was such an over babyface before this, and then he had to go away and come back as a heel. And maybe it's only been the last 12 months or so he's sort of been able to put himself back on that pedestal again, where he totally does deserve, but it is awful. And if you've never watched it, don't bother, it sucks. Number 3 is very personal to me, and it's not actually a bad match at all, but when I look back on it in hindsight, it stands out. We are going to WrestleMania 30, and it's Bray Wyatt again, the Eater of Worlds version, taking on John Cena. Now, I love John Cena. I'm both excited and sad about his 2025 retirement tour, because it is going to just be a shame to see him walk away forever, although we are more used to it now, because he comes and goes as he kind of sits in that semi-retirement vein. But he's a legend, he's an all-timer, and I, for one, in 2025 would give him the 17th title reign. I think he is Mr. WWE, and he deserves to have that record. But Bray Wyatt should have won this match. So hate is a little bit strong on my worst wrestling matches, but with all the very sad things that happened to Bray Wyatt, which still don't feel real, to be completely honest, one of the biggest tragedies in pro wrestling history, as far as I'm concerned, I just would have loved to have seen what we could have done with that Bray Wyatt from the woods with the Wyatt family if he had beaten John Cena, not only at WrestleMania, but WrestleMania 30. Like, John Cena was so established by this point, it wouldn't have made any difference to him. He could have lost 10 matches in a row, and that probably would have become an amazing story. You're like, man, John Cena, he's done it again. Whereas for Bray Wyatt, I mean, in one sense, I guess this is the negative or the positive you can pull out of it. We never would have got the Fiend, and that really showed you how creative Wyatt was. But my favorite version was always the Eater of Worlds, the Bray Wyatt in the rocking chair, and I thought that was a character that could have been like the Undertaker, could have gone like 20 plus years. But because he lost all the time, and he lost in huge matches like this, we never really got to see it. And now it's almost painful to think about it, because Bray Wyatt could have won. We could have got to Backlash, whatever the flub the next pay-per-view would have been, and Cena get his win back. Nobody would have remembered that, because the big win over Cena, if done right, maybe that's the problem anyway, it wouldn't have been. You could have capitalized it just to such a level that who the hell knows where Bray Wyatt, well, obviously very sad what did happen, but, theoretically, where he would be today. And it's a retcon thing, it's a retroactive thing, it's a hindsight thing. But yeah, when I sat down to make this list, I just popped in my brain, because I always think about sort of classic moments that people argue about, Undertaker versus Brock on the same show. But I like that. We've talked about it on other videos. And again, it's still an argument we can have. But then that one popped in my brain. I was like, oh yeah, we did do that. I really didn't like it. Number 2 is another John Cena thing. We can actually keep this one quite quick, to be honest with you. It's SummerSlam 2010 when he beats the Nexus by himself. I'm not saying we could have made every single member of the Nexus. It's not possible. But at the very least, I think we could have used this as a huge stepping off platform for Wade Barrett. And a massive fan of Wade. I love his commentary now as well. I just think he gets professional wrestling. I don't want to say that's what cut his legs out from underneath him. I think that was actually when he reinvented himself as Bad News Barrett, and WWE went, you're too entertaining. You're not allowed to do anymore. No wonder he left the company. But yeah, when you do go back and watch it now, and you sort of see the 6 months build up with the amazing Nexus debut that Daniel Bryan got fired from because he choked Justin Roberts with the tie, then he comes back and is on Team WWE. Good grief, it's messy. But listen, I don't need to repeat myself, even though it's a few years before WrestleMania 30. John Cena was already established by 2010. And because the Nexus had been booked like such a threat, him losing, nobody would have cared. They would, of course. It's like someone put a gun to your head, the gun is going to be victorious. And so many people have talked about this. Wade Barrett has talked about it. Chris Jericho has talked about it. Edge had talked about it. These are smart wrestling people, and they agree that Jonathan Cena should not have won this match. And who knows where we would have been today, like especially with the, not expansion, but WWE is running so many more pay-per-views over in England. Wade Barrett could have been the guy. He could have been sat alongside Drew McIntyre and Sheamus and Pac, and that would have just been awesome, right? It would have been super duper whooper cool. And instead, yeah, it was this sort of stop-start push that Barrett did have to go through, which eventually saw him say, I don't want to do this anymore, because it's really tiring, and I totally do understand that. So maybe these aren't necessarily wrestling matches I hated. It's actually a very fun Survivor Series type match, but it just, to this day, has left me with that sort of low feeling in my tum-tum. I'm like, oh man, we could have done so much better with this, and we didn't. And Ryback's obviously in that Nexus thing too, and he could have been a star, but the more I hear from Ryback, well, the more I get a little bit worried about him. And in number 1 is very specific to me, but I wanted to come up with a fun one because we could talk about matches that everybody talks about. I was like, man, let's not do that. And instead, let's jump forward to WrestleMania 31 before the show had even started. And it's the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. Because you know what I'm talking about. This was the culmination. This was the payoff for everything with Damien Mizdow and The Miz. One of the greatest out-of-nowhere partnerships that's ever happened in wrestling history, where Damien Sandow decided, I'm going to be your stunt double, Miz, and I'm just going to copy you. Now, that sounds dumb. It was dumb. It was goofy wrestling for life. But it's not an easy thing to pull off. You need to have timing, and you need to have the understanding of it all. And Damien Sandow was so good at it, I loved this character. And I was like, this is so damn easy. You can put them in the Battle Royal, and Damien Mizdow can throw out The Miz. That can be the big turn. We turn him into a huge babyface, and he could probably, especially at that time, been an IC champion, been a US champion. I'm 99% sure this was after we'd screwed up his Money in the Bank thing and his Savior of the Masses character. So we actually had a chance of round 2, and you never get a chance of round 2 in wrestling. And we did this. This is what makes it even worse. We did it. And the crowd popped, and then the Big Show snuck up behind Damien Mizdow, and he threw him out. Just so he could go and stand like the trophy like this. Because that's what Andre the Giant had done in his signature pose. And the Big Show kind of looked like Andre the Giant when he first joined WCW. I'm 99% sure they said he was Andre the Giant's kid, which is totally nuts and totally wild. But I suppose maybe it's just indicative of the booking at the time, when it's just so easy. And they all knew that, but they would still throw an asterisk in. And did the Big Show benefit from this? No. And Damien Sandow then came back as a Macho Man ripoff, and then he was released. And I just think it could have been completely different if we hadn't have done that. And I really did enjoy it. And anyone that can be that creative and that funny in pro wrestling probably deserved at least a year off the back of it to see if he can get over. Because you never know. Now, of course, he was never going to be Stone Cold Steve Austin, but the WWF in 1996 also didn't think Stone Cold was going to be Stone Cold. So sometimes just let people have a run. So yes, That's a very silly one, over the top one. But does it annoy me a little bit? Yes. Yes, it does. Now, more importantly, make sure you leave me a comment below, and you're not going to agree with all of them, but throw in some more matches, and maybe we can even do a list like that as well when I talk about your worst matches. It can be from any promotion at any time. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Please turn notifications on all your mobiles and things like that too. Click the video on the screen, because people keep asking me. Yes, the fitness content is coming back. Simon Miller's new fitness channel launches in January 2025. It will be a brand new thing, so keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, go to GorillaMind.com/Simon. Use code Simon to get 10% off. And also, if you can access their Gorilla Mind TikTok shop, which of course you can, just go on TikTok. For the next few days, you can get 30% off just through Halloween. And also, every dollar you spend at the moment enters you into competition to win a car or 10 grand. So you may as well take advantage of that too. If you want to train with Anthony at GoGo at home as well, just go to a GoGo Fitness and use the code Simon20 to get money off that as well. Otherwise, patreon.com/Simon316, Simon316 on all social media. Simon J. Miller on TikTok. Make sure you come and stream our podcast with us there. That's always fun. Simon Miller on Cameo and ProWrestlingTees.com/Simon Miller to get your pro wrestling tees. Look, I'll make sure I get it up there. Updated image. There are new designs, so please do check it out. Ships worldwide. Otherwise, thank you for joining me for another rant, my friends, and I will see you soon.